You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
So, the big joke amongst podcasters and people who listen to podcasts is that everyone has a podcast.
Right.
And so you can, basically if you have enough of attention span and enough money to pay your hosting fees, you can have anything, a podcast about anything you want.
And people do.
And no, I've seen a lot of really interesting podcasts, and I've seen quite a wide variety, but I've been pleasantly surprised by one that you would probably not expect. And that is called Desert Island Dips. And now, by dips, they mean like condiments. So
okay, because I went to Dippin' Dots.
Dippin' Dots. Oh, I thought maybe you might have been thinking of like swimming.
Well, I went there too.
So,
and I thought it was stupid people. So,
okay, well, there's the English language for you. It can mean a variety of things. But I've actually been really pleasantly surprised by it. It's only about a half hour long, so it fits nicely in when I don't have time to listen to one of like my lengthy theology podcasts. But they go through and they talk about different condiments and their history, and then they kind of rank them, and they're looking for the top 5 that would be, if you had to take some to a desert island, and those were your 5 condiments you could use for the rest of your life. Which ones would you take? And now I'm only on episode 6, so they just now have gotten to. They've just now filled up the 5 slots, so they're just now getting to where they're going to have to boot someone off. So the tension is rising. But it's been around for a couple of years. It's pretty entertaining. So if you need something that you can listen to, that's just. It's fun because it's like you get some interesting history tidbits. You find out that the person who started first making mayonnaise popular and sellable in large quantities, his name was Hellman.
Well, that makes sense.
So it's like, oh yeah, I've heard that name before. It's things like that. But it's kind of interesting. It's this lady from Canada. Her name's Emily, actually.
Well, there's one point in her favor,
and
Canadian.
Yeah,
because so many of our listeners are Canadian.
Yeah, and she's moved to London, and her co-host is from England. So it's very pleasant to listen to, the British accents, and it's great. I
can
enjoy
be
it.
Passionate about your condiments if you're going to dedicate a whole podcast in 2 years.
I think they started in 2016 or 20. I'd have to double check. Maybe 2017. Let me see when their first episode is.
I like a good dip. I'm fanatical about a great sauce, but I don't think I could actually devote that much time and energy to do a podcast.
I don't think I could do a whole podcast on it, but they have, and
more power to them.
This is 2018, so I guess they're a little over a year old. But fantastic show if you want something to just, if you're like us and you listen to a lot of history, a lot of theology, a lot of social commentary stuff, and you need something to just get a bit of a break, it's a great show for that.
Well, yeah, now I can see that because you and I have both talked about, it seems like if we aren't actually like physically working on something, we are always mentally working on something.
Yep.
And I have to consciously sometimes go, I need silence, because I've always got a podcast going on, and most of it's to prepare for this,
right.
Different theological views, and, don't always have time to sit down and read a book, although that's how I prefer to get my information.
Yeah.
Ty would not prefer that because I would never cook or clean again.
Yeah, but no, I just want to throw that out there as a recommendation. They're not paying us. It's just a podcast.
Not affiliated in any way.
Just something I came across. And if you like this show and you like people talking about stuff they love, you can hear about the history of condiments from people who love condiments. And it's a fun show. And it's even one I would say is probably safe to listen to with kids.
Well, okay, there you go. There's the clincher, because most of the stuff we listen to is not, I mean.
And we're just talking about Bible stuff.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned in last show. But and last week actually didn't turn out to be near as bad as I thought it was going to be, but still given the topic and where it could have gone, I figured we should throw that out there.
Well, and quite honestly, it didn't get as bad because I kind of vented to you about some of the just really, really out there things that have been said. And one of the dangers of having a vague or ambiguous biblical text is a lot of times people want to insert their agenda on it, impose
their agenda.
Agenda. This is past an agenda. This is like I'm going to try to justify my butchering of the English language now. But it's these people who say,
there's enough ambiguity that I can impose whatever idea I want on.
Yeah, and that's the reason why you've got to have the fuller context. And I think the rape of Dinah was actually a great story to show how understanding it really required that you reached out further to see how it was used in other places in the scripture. So if you didn't listen, I think it was a pretty good show. I go back and listen and tell us what you think.
Yeah.
So,
well, that being said, so we got past Dinah and Shechem and all that stuff. So,
yeah,
where are we now?
So, Jacob and his family, now that they've Simon and Levi have wiped out all the citizens of Shechem, which was a crazy fulfillment of God's prophecy that Jacob and his descendants were going to possess this land. Now, whether it was done in the way God would have had it or not, that was part of the ambiguity of the passage. And now God tells Jacob, hey, you remember that promise you made me to go back to Bethel? It's time for you to get a move on. And Jacob, you kind of have to ask yourself, why does he have to be told this? Why did he spend so much time in Shechem? Mm-hmm. Because if he would have kept traveling like God had, like he'd promised God he would do, then maybe none of this would have happened.
Right.
And again, we're back to that ambiguity. But we do know that Shechem is kind of the traditional route. It's the one that Abraham followed, Shechem and then Bethel and then on to Beersheba and Hebron. And so Jacob's going to follow this same pathway as with the kids. Now, the passage opens, and we're in Genesis 35. God tells Jacob, arise, get yourself to Bethel. And he also gives a very detailed description, the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So basically, the God who set all this in motion is telling you to do this, and you need to do what you promised to do. He also tells them that they need to rid themselves of alien gods in your midst and purify yourself and change your clothes.
Yeah.
So we have a question here. Where did the alien gods come from?
Well, they were probably hanging out with the ladies of Shechem because they killed all the men. That's my guess. I mean, I don't have any hard evidence. But my assumption is there were some guys in the camp. Because, he's moving a lot of cattle. You saw how much he gave away. He's got a lot of workers.
And they all need another wife. He has 4, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's what the boss is doing.
Yeah.
So...
Well, and that is honestly probably where some of them came from. That's one possibility. And the other possibility is how many came with them from Laban's house.
From Laban's house, yeah, because they did take a lot of them.
Well, Rachel at least took some. We know that.
Yeah, Rachel took some. So, yeah, that would make sense. So now it's like, hey, we're getting ready to finally do what God told us to do. Jesus is coming, look busy. We're going to do what God's told us to do. Let's look like we're prepared for it.
Exactly. And when you contrast this chapter with the chapter that went before, this chapter is about purification. It's about readying yourself to meet God. Bethel, we got to remember the events that happened there. This is where God shows up, and we got the ladder, Jacob's ladder event.
Yeah. Now, I do have a question real quick about, does this have anything to do with, because I do know that there are some fairly liberal interpretations from some rabbis that whenever you are in another land, that it's okay to go to the temples of the other gods and pay respect to the local deities. Does this play into some of that thinking that, we're getting ready to go back into the promised land. We can't take the other gods back with us, even though we kind of hung out with them while we were there.
Well, there's probably some of that at play because there is this idea that you should preserve life above all else. And so even if you were forced to bow down and worship another god, if you didn't worship in your heart, then it's okay. As long as you kept the first commandment, which isn't, there's no other gods, so only worship me. It's, you shall have no other gods before me. Mm-hmm. That there is that teaching. I think that's kind of gone out the window in New Testament ideology. I want to put that out there and be clear that, if you're worshiping another god, let's take a scenario from today. I would love to go to like India and Tibet, and I would love to see some of the ancient structures, maybe Japan. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go in and graffiti walls or blow up anything. That would be rude and disrespectful, even if I disagree with the gods that are still being worshipped there.
Right.
But I would.
But you're not going to go throw butter on one of the idols.
Right. Well, that actually might be okay in certain Hindu because butter is one of the.
No, but you're not. No, I'm saying you're not going to do it because that is the way they worship some of the idols is to apply butter to them.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I'm not going to do that. I was thinking like slinging.
No, like not as an insult. No.
Yeah, I'm not going to
I
participate.
know a little bit of history.
Yeah, well, this is good. Yeah, but there's this. I think today one of the things that's come out of diversity and cultural tolerance is the idea that we can allow somebody else to worship in their way. Mm-hmm. We can worship in ours, and we just be respectful. And so we don't have to necessarily participate in the worship to save our lives. And I think that's where that idea with those rabbinic teachings, it was mostly about saving lives. Because,
fair.
A lot of times respecting these other gods wasn't respecting some abstract being. You're respecting Pharaoh. You're respecting Caesar. You're respecting, a real human being with an army and a military police force that could kill you.
Yeah.
So
problematic.
Yeah, it's a little bit more even so than what you would think of with an abstract deity. So, but this whole chapter where it is about purification and it is about ridding yourself of the things that tied you to this land, whether it was Laban or it was Shechem before it had been reclaimed. That's what this whole chapter is about. And it's a startling contrast to the previous chapter where it's about defilement. It's about violence. And so it's put here to make you understand that this is a world of extremes that they're living in. And to help you understand that there is not going to be some kind of in-between middle ground that you can be comfortable in. And so so in some ways it kind of goes against that idea of being okay. You are now in Israel. Now you better toe the line.
Right.
And also notice the purification. It happens before the journey. So even the journey itself is holy. It's not just once you get there, you're going to be involved in this holy moment, but actually preparing to get there is part of the worship. It's part of the sacrifice, and that you need to be engaging your hearts and minds in preparation for that moment as an act of worship that builds. And so, I mean, there's a teaching point right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, no, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry, I was kind of reading ahead, so I don't have much comment. I didn't have time to formulate commentary on that, but no, it's good.
Shame on you.
So it's hard to read and do the thinking at the same time.
Yeah. Adding talking on top of it.
Well, thinking about what you're talking about while reading something else.
Right.
That's where it really gets into it.
Well, and then we've got Jacob, he was kind of scared of taking this trip. I mean, he told Simon Levy that basically, hey, you've made me stink was the translation that you offered to the people around.
Well, I didn't. The ESV did.
ESV. Odious was one translation. You've made me dirty. And so Jacob was really terrified of making this trip because if the people united, they could destroy him. But it says, as they set out, and notice it's as they set out, as they're in the act of obedience. A terror from God fell on all the cities around so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob.
I want to know what happened.
Right? What did they just wake up and like, I'm scared and I don't know what's going on? Or
Well, yeah, and so yeah, was it like a psychological thing? Did something happen? And what was that, verse 5? And this has the most disappointing commentary right here in this book. Okay, it says, verse 5. This verse may be a conclusion to the tale told in chapter 34. Thanks.
35 follows 34.
Well, I know, but it's saying this verse might be wrapping up the story to the tale told in 34, and I'm like, I didn't need that. I kind of figured that out on my own.
Well, and unfortunately, sometimes commentary...
I could have typed that in there, and I would have been just as correct as the person who wrote that. Sorry.
And some commentaries are that bad. I mean,
most of this commentary is pretty good, has some good points, but it's just frustrating whenever I'm like, especially when I'm going with a commentary that's pretty good, and then I get to a verse that is really weird that I need a lot of extra help with, and I get something like that, and I'm like, I thought we were friends. You know, it's like
that's how it was working on my thesis. All the commentaries are like that, and just for reference for those who can't see what you have, that's the Jewish Study Bible. It's available on Amazon. It's like $20. I mean, not to tell you how much your Christmas present was, but
whatever.
It's a great commentary if you want just some Jewish insights into the Old Testament, and then there's some great essays in the back. And so just kind of the introductory way to get into that Jewish perspective, I highly recommend that one. And that's the reason why you have a copy.
No, it's been cool. It's been good to have to read along with.
So, for whatever reason, they're scared. Could have been lightning strikes across the sky or what.
Yeah, I want to know, was it a storm, locust, mass panic, large scale delusions? I don't know. Like, I want to know.
This collective peyote trip or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they get fungus in their bread?
Also a possibility. Oh, and that's the thing. When we start asking these kinds of questions, now we're like, it's not in an attempt to define God or limit what he can do, but when you have, it's just me and you, and we've come up with some crazy things without even giving it really any kind of thought at all. And when you've got a school of people who are sitting around discussing this and it really opens your mind to the fact that the way God did things really wasn't his only option.
Right.
And so I love that about, about what the scripture has to teach us. And I think maybe that's why some of the ambiguities left.
Yeah. What's an army of angels? I mean, I could go on just listing things. That's not going to be the rest of the episode. I'll let us move on. Sorry. Okay. So verse 6, and Jacob came to Luz, and then mine has like 2 dashes and it says, that is Bethel. That's I wanted to point that out. That's a quick indication that an editor was at work. Right. So updating the what? Yeah. Updating the place names. What was the word that toponymy? That's the fancy word for it. Don't know. I don't know. Because it's not been till recently that I realized how important geography was. So a lot of times I they were that place, because it had no meaning for me. So sometimes when you're reading this, it really is good just to have a good map and to, they're here and they're there. Maybe we could get one and maybe fix it up here or something. So you can watch on YouTube and can I get a pointer and I can smack it? Okay, never mind. Nope. All right. I'm not giving you a large stick in this room. So, anyway, they get to Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, and he and all the people who are with him, and they built an altar at the site of Bethel, which is God, house of God. So driving the point home that this is for God. What's yours say? I don't know. I had an ant on my sleeve that was getting knocked. You're not there. That sweet. Sorry. Verse 7. Verse 7. Sorry. Let's see here. The sons of Jacob had come from the field as soon. You're the wrong chapter. I'm in 34. That's different. That sounds very different than what we heard. The translators were a little off that day. And there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel because there God revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother.
Okay, so mine actually in the footnote says God of Bethel, and so and Bethel is house of God, so God of the house of God.
The God of the house of God.
Yeah.
So that God built.
Yeah.
The
well, and
the house that
this,
Jacob built. Sorry.
Well, and that's the thing. This is Jacob and God joining together to build a house. And by house, we're actually speaking of a family,
right?
And so God had promised Jacob this family because up to this point, God had told Abraham, "You're going to be the father of many nations." Yeah, you got 2 kids. Kick one of them out. Okay, and then
he didn't say kick one out.
Well, yeah, he did. Get rid of Isaac. Not Isaac. Ishmael.
Oh, Abraham. I'm sorry. I was
Abraham.
thinking of Jacob. Sorry.
Yeah.
Or I was thinking of Isaac, not Abraham.
Yeah. So I keep hitting the mic stand. Nathan's gonna be grumpy. So I can't talk without my hands.
But okay.
Anyway, so then Isaac only has 2 sons. You're doing it.
Yeah. Now I'm hitting it.
And so Isaac has 2 sons, and one of them's been basically in exile for the last 20 years. And this idea of building a house, Jacob's really the first one who's capable of creating something that even you and I would recognize as family. With the extended aunts and uncles and all the cousins. And
now here's an interesting question. Is there anything to the fact that first you have the son who's not part of the promise in exile, then you have the son who is receiving the promise in exile? So is there anything to that?
There probably is. And it's probably just to show that God's, if nothing else, God is God over all circumstance. Okay. And that you can't, God does put certain systems, and I hate to use the word formulas, in place, but they aren't always...
Maybe models.
Right. Models might work. There's certain structures that you can follow through and go, okay, this is how it works. But then there's always this point where it seems like there's departure where God veers off and says, you're just going to have to trust me. I know this isn't what you're used to. Just trust me. And so Jacob fulfills his vow to return to Bethel. And then we got this verse in here, and I got to tell you, I almost skimmed right past this. Verse 8, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel, so its name was Alon Bechoth. I was like, yeah, I just assumed that all the commentaries would do exactly what this one did to you.
Okay.
Yeah, Deborah died. But Deborah, we haven't heard about her since Isaac and Rebekah got married. So this was a woman that Jacob, grew up with, who was there his whole childhood. We really don't know anything about her, but there are a lot of stories about her that kind of try to explain why she was here. Rashi, and I think he actually pulls this from Genesis Rabbah, which is a commentary on Genesis, which dates further back. But Rashi said that, Rebekah had said she would send for Jacob to come back from Laban's, and she never does.
Right.
And so he said that this was Deborah coming to get Jacob. That's why she met him on the road and why he's traveling with them at this time. Now, that's highly unlikely because Rachel would have been a young woman. This would have been her nurse. So, this would have been basically like Jacob's elderly grandmother coming to get him. So that doesn't really make sense. There's some other things that it's kind of like they're reaching.
Right.
Yeah. And so we talked about how you got to be careful with that. So, but we do have to ask, why is it so significant? Because most of the time when the women die, they just disappear.
Right.
We don't know what happened to Rebekah.
Well, and not even when they die, whenever they stop being part of the plot device.
Yeah.
They're just written out. You don't even, there's not any sign that they even died for all the text tells. They lived forever,
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We got Rebekah's nurse, the record of her death, but not the record of Rebekah herself. Now, one of the theories is that this is kind of a covert way of saying that Rebekah died and Jacob was going to bury her and not have to worry about Esau coming back to get him. I think we've kind of explored reasons why that's probably not true. Matter of fact, when Isaac dies, Jacob and Esau bury him together.
Mhm.
So I think that's not even a really good possibility.
Right.
And that name there, that Elon Bakoth, that's an oak of weeping.
Yeah, which would be a great album title, by the way. Go ahead.
And so I decided to do some digging and see what else I could find. And I knew that there was some tie. Of course, when we talk about Deborah in the Bible, most of us immediately jump to Judges 4.
Those who have been told the story.
Those who have been told the story, which I'm not going to go into the story other than to say she was a judge and a prophetess, and she led the men into a battle, and they won.
Yeah.
So,
but more on that later.
Exactly. And so the two are connected with the name. They're also connected because trees, Deborah, when she did prophesy, Judges 4, Deborah, when she did prophesy, she sat under the palm of Deborah, which is not far from, matter of fact, Bethel is mentioned in that description.
Sure.
So it's the same kind of geography. It's not necessarily the precise location, but the Judges writer is including enough detail to make you think about this location.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially the word Deborah itself, there's a couple of different translations. The first one is bee. And
like to be, or like the honeybee?
No, it's not to be. It's bee. It's the, yeah. You said to be. I said, no, it's not to be. Ha. It's the bee, bzz, honeybee.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Got you.
I was being clever.
Well, so you thought.
Anyway, so there's the bee. And bees are kind of interesting critters. I like bees. But then it's also could be based, it's got the same consonantal stem as the word devar. And the word devar in Hebrew actually means the word, or a word. And when the prophets speak, they speak with ha-devar, the word, which is the creative word of God. So it makes sense that a prophetess would have a name that reflected that office.
That's interesting.
So I've kind of always leaned towards that, but then I love it whenever my presuppositions kind of get played with.
Well, okay, now here's something though. There is kind of a link to the bee. If you're thinking of a bee like in a honeybee, and the word, and like a prophetic word, and David says in the Psalms, the word name is like honey. Kind of, and then there's also when they teach children the Torah, they reward them for memorizing sections of it with honey to get this idea of sweetness involved. So it's I could see having those two
together.
roots and working together to form a picture in the Jewish mindset.
Yeah, and actually that kind of works because we have another writer. His name is Josephus, and Josephus wrote the history of the Jews. It's not always in complete accordance with what we find in the Bible, but he is considered one of our major resources. And so he actually translates this Hebrew word or Hebrew name Deborah into the Greek word for bee, which is Melissa. Now, Melissa was the title of the prophetess and priestess of the Oracle of Delphi. And so bees were women who had the title of bee in the Greek were prophetess and priestess. And it wasn't just Delphi. I mean, it was all over. And we have so many records. And
that's interesting.
Oh, yeah. So there's this idea that Josephus is building on, that this Deborah was also a prophetess and priestess. And remember, the name isn't just a hey you, it's who are you?
Yeah. And oftentimes it's speculated that the names were changed afterward
Mm-hmm.
to talk about that person as they're related to the story,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to them it being a literal name.
Right. And so we've got this connection back there. And so for this reason, a lot of the ancient commentators believe that she was some kind of, if not a prophetess, she was at least a wise woman that they were relying on to help them with good decisions, which would have been common in ancient cultures.
Well, and which would have been a little bit evident in the text as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because otherwise, why would they mourn her death? But you've also got to remember, where did she come from? She was Rebekah's nurse. Who's Rebekah? Before she was Isaac's wife, she was Laban's sister.
Right.
So this Deborah was part of Laban's house, and she would have been part of that household that worshiped gods, worshiped the idols. And so there's this idea that maybe in her death, we're starting to really break off those final ties. If she had been a prophetess, she may not have been a prophetess for God.
Right.
Because Laban himself, he calls himself a Nakash, a diviner.
Right.
So there's all of these ties that tie her in, that she may have been a very spiritually wise woman, but where did that wisdom come from? And so, some of that's speculation, and those are just questions that you kind of have to live with in the text. But I think there's a certain amount of sense to it.
Well, and that's one of those things where is it necessarily something that this is what we have to believe? No, but we could see how viewing the text that way could be useful if you were speaking to a Greek audience.
Right.
Or if you were, speaking to someone maybe in a similar culture. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I love things like that. So she dies. We have that one little verse, which is so random. And then God appears to Jacob again, and he blesses him. And he goes into this big, long blessing. I'm not going to read all of it, but some of the key lines in there. But Israel shall be your name. So we have this reaffirmation that the name that was given to Jacob in the fight really is the title that's going to be used for him. Be fertile and increase. And I'm going to tell you why this is important in a second. And kings shall descend from your loins. And so the thing is, the very next story is Rachel giving birth to Benjamin. And so God says, be fertile and increase, and now I'm going to kill your wife.
Okay.
And Rachel actually dies in a place whose name means fruitful.
Well, I'm curious about if there's anything to the be fertile and increase. Is that anything to do with the be fruitful and multiply that you see at the beginning of Genesis? Is this kind of...
It's tied back to that.
I mean, it's because, we see all the time all these ideas and recurring themes of we keep screwing it up and God keeps giving us course corrections. And so I'm curious about if there's how much significance that tie has to it, other than it's just, hey, I've chosen you to bring about to course correct the rest of the world.
Well, yeah, because the first part of Genesis 1 through 11, that entire part of that story, it's all about the loss of sacred space.
Sure.
God made the big white earth, and then he creates a garden, which the garden in and of itself, when we haven't gone over this, but it's a temple account. And so this is the building of sacred space where God and mankind meet. They don't meet in the rest of the world. They meet in the garden.
Right.
And then they're kicked out of this garden, but they're still told to be fruitful and multiply. And that's still what they're supposed to be doing. Jacob's family, the whole reason of singling them out, starting with Abraham, is to recreate this sacred space so that there's a place for God to once again meet with humanity. And, there's some fulfillment of that in Exodus with the building, with the tabernacle and then the temple and God's Shekinah glory, and that there is this building where they can meet. But that's just still a little glimpse of what's going to happen whenever Jesus comes back, and now the whole world is supposed to be under his rule, and we as believers are trying to create sacred space in our own lives, no matter where we are.
Right.
So, yeah, so there is something to it, because at this point we're still trying to work out that plan of how that sacred space is going to be recreated.
Mhm.
And
That's cool.
and we could, that's where that Deuteronomy 32 worldview comes in, the divine council worldview, and we aren't going to go down that path today, but that all ties in
Yeah.
with this.
I can see that.
So, so Rachel goes into labor, and she has a son. It's a very hard labor. And matter of fact, she names him Ben-Oni, which is this one is
Could be son of my suffering or son of my strength, depending on how you translate it, according to this little footnote here.
it's underneath my son of my sorrow or son of my vigor is what mine says. So synonyms.
Fair enough.
And then Jacob says no. Now, he doesn't have kids with really positive names to begin with. Some of Leah's sons, it's like...
Well, okay, and I do think it's funny because you were talking about, we talked about like what some of their names mean, and that a lot of them seem to be directed at, Leah's sons' names tend to be directed at Rachel, like...
Take that.
Yeah, and to me, that is so funny because, we talk about... when when one of my roommates was getting ready to have a baby, and we were talking, something was said about baby names, and she was saying that we're just talking about how people name their kids weird things, and so we pretty much anytime someone's going to have a baby, you get kicked around, you're like, we hope they don't name them something weird, because that's just... And we think of that as something that someone who's young and immature does, and it's like, that's been going on for a while.
Yeah. Some of these Bible names, it's like Ichabod. There is no glory. I mean, the glory has departed. Who names their child something like that? But at the same time, we today will go, hey, this name was in the Bible, and so I'm going to name my kid this. It's like, no, don't stop it. Don't do that. So. This is the only child that Jacob says, that's just too weird. And he actually changes Benjamin's name to son of my right hand. And so because of that, there's speculation that, and it can be read this way, that this is really Rachel's confession, that the son of my sorrow, son of my shame is another translation, that the first son, Joseph, she was able to conceive because she used mandrakes.
Right.
Now she's got Benjamin, and because she used the idols from her father's house. Now, ultimately, we all we believe God's ultimately in control, but there's something to these magical practices that they're doing, that they're attributing some kind of benefit or help.
Right.
And so...
And now this is just kind of our best guess based on some commentaries.
And
so it's not solid.
Well, the thing is, what this does, that portion in Deborah and with Rachel here, what you're really doing, you're building that idea that removing the people who still hung on to those idols and had those ties. I mean, now Rachel, she was desperate. She was just trying to get some help. I mean, she goes to Jacob and says, give me a son. And Jacob's like, it's your problem. Go figure it out. And so she did. She came up with a solution, and it was the only solution she knew, being the daughter of Laban.
Right. Now, one thing I do want to talk about real quick, and this, I know you probably weren't planning on this, but you're talking about getting rid of all the people who were worshiping other gods or using idols, things like that. Now, I know God gets a lot of flack for that kind of thing. Both in and outside the church, we struggle with that. And so when we think about like the Deuteronomy 32, the worldview, the divine council stuff, where you have these other Elohim, and you have idols representing these other gods.
And real beings, not just figments of somebody's imagination.
Right. Well, yeah. And so, but we think about it, we think about it, the way we're kind of taught the Bible is, well, God made the world and he made one whole rule in the whole world, and we broke that one silly rule.
Right.
And so now he's going to kill us. But if you think about the way that God talks about his relationship to his church and his people, he uses these marriage analogies.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes I think we kind of caricaturize it as God put this law up here and it's got all these little arbitrary details. And if you break just one of them, then you're out. He's going to kill you. And I think what we fail to grasp when we caricaturize God like that is that when he uses this marriage analogy and someone chooses to not follow his law, and we're not talking about accidental sin.
Right.
We're talking about this arrogant, I'm going to defy your law because I don't want to worship you the way that I think you should be worshiped, or I'm going to go follow another God. We're not talking about, to use the marriage analogy, we're not saying someone forgot to take out the garbage, so God's divorcing them. We're saying you slept around with the neighbor,
and God caught them in your bed together.
So it's time for you to leave.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that when you really break down the analogy, it's not just...
It's a matter of loyalty.
Yeah, it's not God was having a bad day at work and came home and to dirty dishes and kicked you out. It goes much farther than that.
Well, and I think we miss that. And there's a great line in Frida, shameless commentary and plug. But she realizes that Diego is always going to sleep around.
Mm-hmm.
She accepts that, but she makes one demand: can you be loyal? And her idea of loyalty wasn't necessarily sexual fidelity, but it was always putting them first in the way that they had defined it. Now, I don't think that's healthy. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, we're not endorsing their marriage arrangement.
Their marriage was so messed up. But it's the same kind of, I see that idea here with God, because even whenever there has been infidelity, there usually is this point of redemption where he's like reaching out and calling them back. I mean, we see that vividly in Hosea with the story there. But the thing is, with this, there's this is the beginning. This is the foundation. The consequences are so much more harsh.
Mm-hmm.
And they almost have to be, because you've got to remember, these people, they were steeped in these cultures and traditions of not just like out there gods, of the gods of the heavens and different things, ancestor worship, having these things in their home, that they would feed them, that they would clothe them. This was normal day-to-day life. And so God's really having to dig out some deep roots here.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'd like to point out that, yes, Rachel died, and I do think it has something to do with her bringing these fertility gods along. But Jacob actually was the one who spoke the death sentence.
Right.
Because
I think we talked about that in an earlier episode where when he tells Laban, whoever, if you find these with any of my people, they're going to die.
And this is really important, because with Genesis 3, we start out with Adam saying basically, hey, yeah, I didn't really want to eat it, but this woman that you forced on me, God, made me have a bite,
Mm-hmm.
And so Adam doesn't have, he doesn't take responsibility from it for his own action. He blames the woman. When Abraham allows Pharaoh and Abimelech to take Sarah, it's her fault too. She's just too beautiful, and he doesn't want to die. There's never at any point up to this point are the men taking any kind of responsibility for the women. The only time we see that has been Simon and Levi with Dinah.
Right.
And even then, they aren't taking responsibility for their own actions. They're just extending protection. So we don't have any man at this point taking responsibility for the things he has brought on his own family.
Right.
And that's going to come into play, because when that happens, then everything takes off.
Right.
Sacred space can be created. We can start to have the building of that family. We can start to have healthy relationships, but it's going to take some crazy circumstances that I can't wait to talk about. So anyway.
Yeah, sorry, that was my, I didn't mean to take us too far down that field, but that's something that we had talked about before that I thought was a good analogy, especially when if we're talking about God getting rid of idolaters and especially killing them, then I think it would just be a good time to throw that in.
Oh yeah. I mean, and the thing is, with where she died, Jacob, he still sees her as his primary wife. He erects a pillar that at the time of the writing to who knows when, which editor may have put that in, that the pillar was there from that time until the day, that day. So we don't know how long it was there. There's still some dispute. Some people say they found it. Other people say you haven't. It's very closely related to Bethlehem. We talked about that on a previous episode. And Jacob really does see Rachel as his wife, but like we said last time, the Torah not so much. Now, in the blessing that God gave him, he says that kings will descend from you. And you still see echoes of the Leah and Rachel saga, because Saul, the first king, he's from the tribe of Benjamin.
Okay.
He's the wrong king, because all the other kings, they're supposed to be from the tribe
of Judah. Yeah.
So, and Judah is Leah's son. And not only is she Leah's son, she's Leah's son who was raised after his mother said, you know what? This is the way it is. I'm going to be okay. God has got me. He's going to take care of this.
Right.
So you still see this echo of who is the rightful son, who is the real son, because Judah doesn't have that same relationship with his dad.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting to see how the things that are going on in this family so early, there's going to be ripples throughout the rest of the Bible. So
it's pretty interesting.
But after that, there's Esau. We got a few chapters, I guess one chapter of Esau's descendants. I looked.
Well, before that, before we get there, at the very end of 35, we do see Isaac passes away. We only get like a paragraph on it that Jacob gets a chance to go back to Isaac. We're not told how long he's there, but apparently while he's with Isaac, Isaac dies, and Esau and Jacob bury him. And that's where I think we touched on that we've kind of alluded to that, but this is where that happens.
Well,
that they come back, and I guess it's kind of assumed that they have continued the peace that they made earlier on with all the gifts.
Yeah, and this is also very reminiscent of Isaac and Ishmael coming back together to bury Abraham. And once again, I think this kind of drives home that point that even though you may not be the one that the promises of the covenant is being delivered through, it doesn't mean you're beyond redemption.
Well, and I think I found a way to say what I was trying to say. It's like not so much redemption necessarily. And I think that's, you're not beyond redemption. I think that's definitely an aspect of it. But to be able to participate in the blessings without being part of the promise. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
not being necessarily part of the priesthood, but being able to participate in the blessings and the abundance that God can provide. Because God says, "I'll bless those who bless you," and so by hanging out with them, and for lack of a better term, but by cohabitating and being good neighbors and being good extended family, even you get to participate in the blessing that's going on. The blessing extends beyond Israel. Well,
and we see that with Esau. I mean, he was evidently doing pretty well when Jacob came back. He had 400 men with him. That's not a small army for a private individual.
Yeah, that's not something you just call your neighbors up for.
Right. And so there is that aspect. And we also see it again. We saw it previously with Abraham and Melchizedek. When Melchizedek shows up, he's not part of the tribe or the line from Abraham. He's from outside the family, but he is the priest of the one true God. And we see it again with Moses and Jethro. So we've got people who are not part of the covenant community per se. They aren't going to have the promised land. They aren't going, well, Melchizedek was in Salem, which was the early name for Jerusalem. But, they aren't going to be the ones that help birth the Messiah. They aren't going to bring about the day of the Lord, but they are still included under this covenant, because the rabbis believed that, okay, when Noah gets off the ark, there's a list of rules that's given to him, and there's like 7 rules there. I don't have them all, but the main one is that you don't kill another human being.
Right.
And the rabbi said, if you did this, then it's going to be counted to you as righteousness. And they're like simple rules. They're
if you followed the rules, not if you killed someone.
Right. Don't kill someone. But if you followed the rules, I mean, it's very much, you're going to be included in this blessing. It's going to be counted to you as righteousness. And so it's accessible. God's love and blessing is accessible, even if you're outside of that line.
Even if you're not part of the quote, the promise, or I'm trying to think of a better way to say that, because
it's kind of bulky.
It's kind of bulky, and it's kind of cumbersome to think of that. If you're not part of the, I don't know, if you want to use noble purpose, I guess as some translations use, and I think it's Romans. So
no, this is the hard thing about trying to distill a theological view into something that you can put an easy handle on.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
is why I'm not on Twitter. Well, I am, but I mean,
so this is why we don't tweet well.
No, our ideas are too complex, and I don't. As we go into,
or we may just not be that witty. They say brevity is the soul of wit, so that might be what it is.
I'm pretty witty, but yeah. So if I do say so myself, humble too.
Just not brief.
No, not brief.
So soulless wit. I don't know. Sorry.
And this is where our weird ideas come from. But I actually, this next chapter actually illustrates some of what we were saying about the idea of still being able to have favor and even to have importance. Because in the middle of Jacob's story, we have this little crossover into Esau's descendants.
Yeah, it's like, meanwhile, back over at Esau's
back
camp.
at the ranch.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I tried to come up with something like really good and fascinating. I failed miserably.
It's a genealogy. It's very difficult.
It really is.
You didn't translate all the names and try to make a sentence or anything like that?
No, I was not going to waste my time.
There's no chiastic structure in there?
There probably is. I mean, but I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. There are some places I draw the line. It's like I was telling you over lunch, I would go look at different sources, and at one point I was just like Googling just random terms to see if anybody had something out there, because even in the academic stuff, there's like nothing. And well, I'm sorry, there were a couple of things, but they were like, I had to pay $53 for one and $49 for another. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, y'all are worth it, but I don't have it. So anyway,
we'll wait on the answer.
Yeah. Patreon. Anyway, but no, I'm kidding. Completely kidding. But so there's some work that's done there. But the fact that you do have this, I think that's really the most important thing about it. It's here.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it is included, and Esau is, he is remembered. And so the first verse is, this is the line of Esau, that is Edom. So we do get the identification that the descendants of Esau are going to become Edom. That's an important thing to know, because the Edomites are going to be major players after the Exodus.
Right. And
during the Exodus. And with King Saul, which is kind of interesting, because we've got this, there's probably something to the fact that we're looking at Rachel's death, and then Esau rising up. Saul actually goes against the king of the Edomites. That's the king that he keeps alive, that he should have killed. And that Samuel gets onto him, says the kingship is going to be taken away from you because you didn't do what God told you to do. So there's probably some kind of tie-in there that is just now clicking.
Yeah.
So
we can come back to that later if we want. But
yeah, no, I'm throwing it out there. I'm probably not going to go into anything.
Sure.
But the other interesting thing is that Esau's descendants are grouped according to his wives. And you got to remember, he had 2 Hittite wives or Canaanite wives. Then he went and got a wife from Ishmael.
Right.
And so even in that, the way that the lineage is grouped, that's kind of like, okay, here's his Canaanite wives. They're over here. And Ishmael's wives are a little bit more Ishmael's daughters are a little bit more important, so we're going to give them a little bit more space. Most of them, to me, I'm reading through this. This is just names. They are living in the country of Seir. They do have the geographic locations where they're living. That's going to become important when we go into the conquest of the Holy Land. I didn't see any reason for us to go over it twice. We probably should if we were being true academics.
So we're talking about why we're not talking about it?
Yeah, we're talking about why we're not talking about it.
Yeah, let's move on.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that's where I kind of ran out and went, so yeah, we'll be moving on to Joseph after that. But I just wanted to acknowledge that it was there and why it was there, that
yeah,
they're going to become major players, and acknowledge that, yeah, the limits of my patience and interest sometimes does.
So if you know of a good article about that chapter, send it to us.
Yeah, I would be interested in reading what somebody smarter than me has to say about it.
Yeah.
Because I honestly, I just kept glazing over, and I don't feel too bad because it is the Begats.
Right. Well, and that's saying something if you're losing interest in it, because you can read some stuff that loses me, and I'm not a slouch when it comes to reading, but man, there's some stuff that you read that does lose me from time to time.
And I'm like, this is so awesome. I will say one of the major descendants of Esau is the Amalekites, and they're going to show up again. And so we start to see Esau's descendants, not only as they're being born, they're also being absorbed by the surrounding cultures. And, Esau set that in place whenever he married women who were Canaanites. And this is going to become a problem later in the, down the road, because Esau did not have the vision for the future that Jacob had. And Jacob was willing to go that extra mile. I mean, literally the extra 7 years to get the right wife.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Well, cool. That sounds like a good place to end it for this time. And so, yeah, everyone out there in internet world, the, I don't know, podcastosphere, Podland, the pod people.
No, that's different.
Yep. So all of our listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know the drill. Like, comment, share.
Raven Creek SC, we're everywhere.
Raven Creek SC on all social media, ravencreeksc.com. Patreon.com. If you really, really liked it, you can support us there at patreon.com/ravencreeksc. And hopefully by this time I should have the new store up. We've been having some issues with that. But that should be ready to go by the time this airs, and we will be excited to... we're going to be slimming down the line a little bit, kind of focusing a little more. I think I went a little bit crazy with all the stuff that I could get from this company, that I just put it all on this store. So we're going to be kind of slimming down our inventory a little bit and kind of focusing a little more. But that's something you can learn about on the website.
Yeah.
If you go to ravencreeksc.com, click the support link, and you can find all that stuff there. So anyway, come back next time. We like having you, and we like being here. So have a good week. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes, or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.